I'm Lorraine Williamson. In this edition of Nourishing Minds, we speak with Candace Laing, the Vice President, Sustainability and Stakeholder Relations with our good friends at Nutrien. Well, Candace, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. We are always excited when we get to steal a little bit of our partners' time and learn more about what they're doing, especially when it comes to Nutrien. You guys are very busy, and you've had some big announcements lately in the news with regards to feeding the future. Can you tell us a little bit about what the initiative is all about?
Yeah, absolutely, Lorraine. Thanks for having me today. But in addition, last month to coming out with our sustainability and ESG report, we also did launch the Feeding the Future plan, as we call it. And what that means is we have framed up how Nutrien plans to have global impact, and really in three key areas, which all are about transforming agriculture, which I'll come back to in a minute. But we need to feed a growing population and figure out how to do that sustainably as we look at our own footprint and have a good climate action strategy. And as we also have an eye to making the sector more inclusive. So we also have that focus on inclusive agriculture. But really, coming back to it, all stems around this need to transform agriculture. But as you and I both know, agriculture has been transforming greatly in my lifetime, as I've seen, major yield increases and resiliency really change dramatically in my family's farm. And you think about the impact on that globally, whether it's, having avoided famine or preserving, nature in our carbon sinks. Our challenge is just that we need to do that again, because as we work to continue to feed a growing population, we need to bring even more solutions for climate along the way as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We've sort of been there, and now time has changed. Farming practices have changed, technology, things are advancing, and so now the industry keeps up with all of these advancements. And I think that's really important, because when you talk to some individuals about agriculture, they kind of have that old, of course, McDonald farm mentality, and it's a very progressive industry. And it is remarkable to see what happens in a lifetime, how quickly things change. So we talk a little bit about the commitment. So you've got your plan, and I've read the plan, and it's a really good plan. And I thought it was, I'm sure your team worked with a lot of experts on this to come up with a very tangible plan. What are some of the commitments that you've made within that document?
Sure. So I'll start with one that has a big number on it, which is 75 million acres. And we intend to scale productive and sustainable agriculture on 75 million acres. And really, that just comes to the scale we have as Nutrien, being the world's largest agricultural solutions provider. And we work with over 500,000 growers globally, most of those right here in North America. So we really believe we're uniquely positioned to help growers with this challenge of how do we feed people and do that in a way that really preserves the resources, which we know, I haven't met a farmer who's not interested in that, right? But I mean, they live off the land. So we just need to help them find and implement these solutions at scale. We're starting with a carbon program that will really be the backbone of what kind of ladders up into those 75 million acres, starting with bringing a new revenue stream to growers, paying them for their services and ability to reduce emissions and sequester carbon in our soils. So in addition to that, we're committed as a company to reducing our own emissions and having science-based targets. So we're starting with a 30% reduction in intensity per ton of product in our nitrogen, business, and are reducing our scope 1 and 2 emissions. And then on top of that, looking at what we can do in the production of low carbon fertilizers as well.
That's tremendous. I get stuck on that 75 million acres. That's a great number. That puts the scale, into our minds, which is fantastic. And then Nutrien's role. If we back this up a little bit, Candace, I should probably tie in the Sustainable Development Goals. Ag for Life, we've had a pleasure of being a partner with Nutrien for many, many years. And I know your organization was one of the leads when we were talking about this idea of the Sustainable Development Goals and what they are. And gosh, 10 years ago, they seemed new. They were really, today, there's lots and lots and lots of interest, which is fantastic in the Sustainable Development Goals. But as I say, Nutrien sort of led the way, at least in my mind, for an organization that was very progressive when it came to the SDGs, as they've been shortened and called. How do you take what you've been building on with the SDGs and now layering that in, if you will, with the Feeding the Future and your sustainability plan?
Oh, great question. And I'll talk a bit in acronyms here because I want to talk SDGs and then also ESG. So,
yeah, exactly.
And it's fair criticism. Our space is filled with unhelpful acronyms, but I'll explain. So the SDGs, absolutely. We've been looking at those since they came out in 2015, and really, I mean, it's the globe's sustainable development agenda, and these goals are for everybody, not just governments, but all of us, and especially corporates have an important role to play. And what I like about the 17 goals is that finally we're thinking about things from a systems perspective, instead of just saying over here we need to address climate, and there's an urgency around that. The SDGs actually bring it all together and say, well, we have to figure these things out together, which means we can't solve for climate in a way that threatens food security. So what this means for Nutrien, and you'll see in our plan, is we look at SDG number 2, which is ending hunger. And within that SDG is a goal to scale productive and sustainable agriculture, because we know there's this critical nexus between food and climate, and we have to solve for them together. We can't have climate solutions, like I said, that threaten food security. So it is a very important and helpful, actually, backdrop to our strategy. But shifting into like the SDGs, they're important context, and we're actually expected as a business to help deliver on them and have impact on them. But that goes hand in hand with what we call ESG, which is now almost just more of a mainstream term for sustainability. And it's how our investors like to frame sustainability, because we're expected now as a company, not by just the general public or other stakeholder groups, to be doing good as business and have a heart as business. We're actually expected by our shareholders to be addressing these more complex and long-term risks and these environmental and social risks. How are we delivering on them as a business? Because in the long term, that actually impacts our value. So we're actually being evaluated, assessed, and compared company to company on our sustainability performance in ways we've never been in previous years. So it actually, our strategy, although I'd say transforming agriculture has always been core to our business, now it's really integrated into our sustainability strategy, and core business are really one and the same.
It's really interesting because we talk about ESGs, and you're right, it's become a bit more mainstream, and people are talking ESGs, and corporations are measured by them, and investors are deciding which companies to invest based on that. And it seems that the idea of the ESGs has just gained this momentum. It's really snowballed. And I think part of that is that next generation consumer that we talk a lot about in agriculture, wanting to do good and to give back to society, and having the expectations that large corporations, well, small, medium, and large corporations do good. And so it is nice to see. And I think one thing that really attracted me to your plan and this nutrient strategy is you guys have really looked into it. As an organization, a large organization with a global presence, what can you do, and how can you do it? So it's not going to be something, feeding the planet sustainably, environment, climate, all of that. That's not going to be done just by yourselves. How do you work with partners to sort of foresee unrolling the plan?
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned the consumer, because food companies that are, very close to that consumer are some of our best partners, because they're on the other side of the grower, downstream from the grower, we're upstream from the grower. So we actually are coming together to partner and support growers in the changes we need to see, because the food companies are saying we want to source sustainably. They're also saying they need to reduce their own emissions as food companies, but there's those two parts. There's their own footprint from a climate perspective, but then there is like that consumer pull, right, and demand. And I predict we will have eco labeling on our products, just like we have nutritional labeling, as soon as we can get the data out of the farm level, which is one of our challenges, right? We have to be able to measure these outcomes. You have to be able to measure the carbon footprint, which I think consumers do want to see in what they're purchasing. But that partnership in kind of wrapping ourselves around the grower who's between us has been a big part of our strategy and approach. So as we're piloting our carbon program, we have supply chain partners and a lot of those food and value chain partners working like hand in hand with us to be able to scale this.
Yeah, it's really good. And it's interesting because I imagine what are the challenges, and measurement is a big one, because we're working, I know there's groups working on measurement, and how do you put a measure, and how do you measure this, and how do you measure that? So it is coming. And I totally agree. There'll be another label on our food that talks about this very thing. And I think that that's okay, right? I think that we're blessed to have a lot of choice here, especially in this country, around food, and having big organizations sort of step up and say, yeah, we are responsible. We're change makers as well, and and sort of driving forward, if you will. And another point that I really like is that you've thought about and are working with the producer. Because a lot of times, things will come top down, and it's, at the primary production level, then things have to be integrated. And how are they going to do that? You mentioned earlier around the carbon capture and actually providing a monetary incentive. I think those are all really well thought out, just based on conversations that I've had with different, producers and commodity groups, and, everyday Albertans, if you will, just around some of the challenges as we try to, feed the future, if you will, and all of the aspects that go into it. So tell me a little bit more about the inclusive agriculture. What does that mean to Nutrien?
So what it means is, and I hope and I hope others know that equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts have long been important and a priority internally, whether that's our workforce efforts or diversifying and making our supply chains more inclusive. And by putting this in our strategy, it's just making sure we're taking that approach to everything we do in our business. And that has a grower facing piece and an industry facing piece as well. Because I think when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's about pulling every lever that we have to make an impact. And so I think that the two that we have in our plan, and I'm really excited about them, are we do have a grower facing piece where, we provide so many services and solutions to growers. Do we even know what the unique needs of some of our diverse grower groups are? Are we well connected enough with diverse grower groups? What would their needs be? How can we look at our program services? We have an eye to our financial services to make sure even navigating and accessing those services, works for diverse grower groups. The second opportunity we're looking at, and this one is going to be really exciting, I think, as well, because Nutrien is a fast route to market for innovation and ag tech. And we have a lot of interesting partnerships, whether it's with startups or established businesses or other kinds of unique partnerships to really get new ag tech to market. And this is where I hope all youth contemplating agriculture are aware as well. There are many avenues into agriculture besides being the farmer, although I'd promote farming, absolutely, not to not promote that, but there are so many different ways to be engaged in agriculture. And innovation is a very exciting one. So like we diversify our supply chain efforts, we have an eye to diversifying our partnerships and seeking out that as a lane where it can be a new opportunity for people to enter the sector and engage where maybe they hadn't previously.
That's really interesting. And one thing I like, as you're talking about this is that global connectivity, because there's not a lot of organizations that sort of have a perspective at agriculture around the world at the level that Nutrien does, and being able to take the best practices and innovation and advancements in one area and bring it to another, or see if it's relevant or adapt it, is a really interesting position to be in as a leader in the agriculture space. But at the same time, and I speak from the heart on this, because as Ag for Life, we've been partners with Nutrien for many, many years. You're very committed to the communities that you live and work and do business in, and are very progressive when it comes to community investment and back to that giving back. So it's inspiring to see a large organization be able to do that. You're at that big micro and macro levels where you can do everything really well, and that's probably an info soundbite product plug for Nutrien, but it is true. It's your team works really hard, and both in everything that you do, you guys really excel and build yourselves around partnerships. So kudos to you and your team for that, because we sure enjoy the partnership and working with your team for many reasons. One other area, Candace, I want to talk about, it's a big area, of course, is environment. And we talk about climate change, and we hear a lot of talk about climate change. We're seeing a lot around net zero commitments. What exactly does Nutrien, or does Nutrien have a commitment in that area, or what is that area that they're looking at?
Yeah, no, it's a really big topic this year, and I think we're leading up to some big meetings this fall around climate, around food system transformation. So net zero is going to be a very hot topic. So what happened after the Paris Agreement really came to be is that a few years later, there was another report that came out and said, even the Paris Agreement, the level of ambition in there is not great enough. We have to go further. So that really led us to a place where, 2 degrees, or holding global warming to 2 degrees or less, is not enough. We have to go to 1.5. And that trajectory really means that we hit net zero emissions by 2050. And so that becomes the new kind of goal. And so you see a lot of these commitments coming out. I would say a lot of companies aren't quite sure how they're going to get there yet. But on the exciting front, it does mean we're going to have, I think, a very important role of credible offsets to meet those commitments. And that's where our carbon program with growers comes in. I'll come back to that in just a second. For Nutrien, we are committed to setting science-based targets that align with the Paris Agreement, but we are engaged in figuring out what that pathway looks like for our sector, because our sector has some challenges. We have some limitations when it comes to the technology, to the chemistry processes we use to produce fertilizer that exists today. Maybe those will change in 15 years, 20 years. Our access to renewable energy will change in 15, 20 years. But we have some challenges between now and then. So we need to work out with our sector a pathway that helps us, take that decarbonization in the right stages and steps. So we're working on that. So today we do not have a net zero commitment, but we're working on what the pathway to a net zero 2050 does look like. So, but because a lot of these companies and a lot of the food companies and others have these net zero commitments, it means that there's going to be increased demand for credible offsets, not as a means to achieve net zero, but to, in addition to a company reducing their own emissions, they're going to have residual emissions. They need offsets in order to get to a net zero scenario. So we believe, Nutrien believes, those offsets should come just as much from nature as they do from, offsets coming from industrial processes. And so why not leverage our soils that our growers are working in so hard day in and out? And then instead of bringing policy that punishes growers for emissions, why don't we reward them for their ecosystem services and help them, scale up their ability to both reduce emissions and sequester carbon and, make our breadbasket a massive carbon sink. And to Alberta's credit, there's been great protocols developed that give us a great start. And I actually am quite optimistic about how Canada can lead the way in this front. So we're really busy this year with piloting that in the prairie provinces with growers. I think we have about 45,000 acres signed up in our pilots this year to actually build out and modernize our protocols and make sure we can get a pathway to really high quality verified carbon credits for growers so they can be really recognized and rewarded for what they can do for providing solutions for climate.
Fantastic. That's excellent.
Sorry, that was a long answer to the net zero question, but it's a big question.
It's a loaded big question, and it was a fabulous answer. Lots of excitement in there as well. And one of the sentences, and I won't read the whole sentence, but when I was reading your Feeding the Future plan, I really liked was to help lead the next wave of agriculture's evolution. And I underlined that because I thought that was really strong. Well, half a sentence that I've put it into this context, but I thought it was really strong, as it underpins the what you guys are looking at doing with the sustainability and the environment and the climate and the inclusiveness. All of that's going to come together, and I'm assuming that that's what you mean is sort of that next wave, this next phase, if you will, of agriculture.
Absolutely. And maybe just my concluding comment was evolution is an important word, because I think as we demonstrate to the world what agriculture can deliver, it's on top of the gratitude of what farmers have already delivered in what has been my lifetime. And I want to ensure all stakeholders appreciate that as they watch us deliver it once again.
That's brilliant. And I think that's an excellent way to end our conversation today, because it's an evolution from, many, many years ago. I always say my grandfather's still alive. He's 103. He was a farmer. And what he's seen, how agriculture's evolved, and he smiles today when he thinks about, what's happening out in the field. So we thank, farmers for feeding the world, and we thank Nutrien for all that you do. So thank you so much for taking the time, Candace, to join us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.